June 1944. Europe is burning for the 5th year in a row. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the ruins of Warsaw, the world is learning a brutal truth. Machines now decide who lives and who vanishes. In that furnace of steel and smoke, one machine rose above all others, a weapon so feared that entire divisions would break at the sound of its engine. It was called the Tiger. How did 8 inches of hardened steel become a legend? How did a single tank rewrite the psychology of war? The Tiger I, officially Panzerkampfwagen 6. E was born not from ambition, but from fear. In the summer of 1941, when the German army met the Soviet T-34 and KV-1, its pride cracked. Their own Panzer III and IV shells bounced uselessly from Russian armor. Panic climbed the ranks. Within months, Berlin issued an impossible order: build something untouchable. By August 1942, the Tiger rolled out of the Henschel factory 56 tons of industrial perfection. One tank cost as much as 20 field guns. Each required 300,000 man-hours to assemble. But the result was terrifying. Its frontal armor, 100 millimeters thick. Its turret, 120. Its main gun, the 88mm Kwak 36, modified from the flak gun that had already haunted Allied pilots over North Africa. At 1 kilometer, it could pierce 4 inches of sloped armor. At 2 kilometers, more than a mile, it could kill a Sherman before the Americans even saw it. And yet, this was more than hardware. The Tiger was theater. It wasn't just built to fight, it was built to dominate the mind. Allied soldiers whispered its name like a curse. British tank crews called it the Beast. Soviet commanders warned, if you see one Tiger, expect 5 more you can't see. Statistically, they were right to fear it. In 1943 alone, 1,347 Tigers were produced. For every Tiger that left a German factory, the United States built 40 Shermans. But in battle, that imbalance meant little. Reports from the Eastern Front showed kill ratios as high as 10-1. Some battalions were erased before they could even return fire. So how do you fight an enemy you can't even scratch? How do you stop a 56-ton fortress when your strongest shell bounces off like rain on stone? By 1944, Allied intelligence called it the psychological weapon. Infantry froze when they heard its engines. Air support often arrived too late. Entire columns rerouted just to avoid confrontation. The Tiger had become less a machine than a myth, an iron god dragging dust and fear wherever it moved. But every legend hides a flaw. Beneath the armor, behind the roaring engine, there was a weakness waiting to be seen not by generals, but by someone ordinary. Someone who understood how systems break, how perfection rusts from the inside. The war was about to meet that man, and history, 56 tons of it, was about to stop. War has a strange sense of irony. What man calls perfection, war calls fragility. By the spring of 1944, the German Tiger, I had earned its crown as the apex predator of the battlefield. Its thick armor shrugged off Allied shells. Its 88mm gun turned tanks into bonfires at 2,000 yards. Each Tiger was a rolling fortress, and every Allied soldier who saw one felt a cold certainty. Survival was a matter of luck. But behind its thunderous power lay a truth. The German High Command refused to see the Tiger was eating Germany alive from the inside. Each one demanded 300,000 man-hours to produce, more labor than a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber. It devoured 700 liters of fuel every 100 kilometers, at a time when the Reich's fuel convoys were already ash on the roads. Spare parts? Non-existent. Every Tiger that broke down became its own tomb. By 1944, fewer than 500 Tigers remained operational across all fronts, less than the number of Sherman tanks the US built in a single week. On paper, it was unstoppable. In practice, it was unsustainable. Still, Hitler demanded more. Perfection had become his religion. Engineers at Henschel were told to design not merely a tank, but a monument. So they gave the Tiger an extraordinary skeleton, an overlapping system of road wheels so complex it looked more like a clock than a combat vehicle. 9 wheels per side, 3 interleaved layers. Each wheel supported a fraction of the 56-ton beast's weight. Spread the load, reduce the pressure, glide over mud where others sank. It was brilliant engineering until it met the real world. Mud, sand, ice, grit, the raw material of every battlefield. In Russia, the gaps between those beautiful wheels packed with frozen clay each night. Crews spent hours before dawn hammering with blowtorches and crowbars, trying to free them before the enemy woke. In Africa, fine sand ground the rubber rings off the wheels like glass paper. In France, wet earth turned to glue. To change one inner wheel, a crew had to remove up to 8 outer ones. What took an American crew 20 minutes on a Sherman could take a Tiger crew half a day, and that's if they had a crane. Every extra part meant an extra failure point. Every layer of precision meant another chance for dirt to kill a machine that thought it was immortal. Numbers tell the rest of the story. By June 1944, of the 1,347 Tigers built, less than 600 remained. Only 350 were combat ready. Many weren't destroyed by enemy fire. They were abandoned, sabotaged, or burned by their own crews when fuel or mobility ran out. For every Tiger that reached the front, one was stranded by its own complexity. And yet, to the men who fought beneath its shadow, the myth persisted. Allied tankers learned to recognize the Tiger's growl, the deep, uneven rhythm of the Maybach engine echoing through the hedgerows. It wasn't just a sound, it was a warning, a promise of death carved in metal. In Normandy, that myth became a trap of its own. The bocage, the ancient maze of hedges and sunken lanes, was the one terrain where the Tiger's size worked against it. A single narrow road could turn a 56-ton fortress into a coffin. Its overlapping wheels, its wide tracks, the very things that gave it grace on open ground, now chained it in place. But war doesn't reveal weakness gently. It takes a man's life to teach another where the fault line lies. Across those hedgerows, American combat engineers worked under constant fire, clearing mines, repairing roads, and cutting communication lines. They weren't tank men. They weren't heroes in shining armor. They were tradesmen with shovels and wire cutters. And one of them was named Corporal James Mallister, 23 years old, Pittsburgh-born electrician, recently assigned to the 1st Infantry Division. His war wasn't glory, it was problem-solving under fire. 3 days after D-Day, outside the shattered town of Marquis, Mallister saw his first Tiger. The monster had run out of fuel and been left by its crew. To others, it was a carcass of war. To Mallister, it was a blueprint. He climbed its hull, ran his hands along the track links, 11 pounds of steel each, and counted the wheels. He saw the narrow 3-inch gaps where the wheels nearly touched but didn't. In one of those gaps, a single rock had cracked the rubber ring of a road wheel. A chain fragment had chewed through 3 links of track. Mallister stared at those flaws and thought not like a soldier, but like an electrician. He understood systems, he understood tension, he understood that when force meets friction, something has to give. That moment, quiet, almost trivial, was the hinge of history, because 3 weeks later, he would face the Tigers again. But this time, he would remember those 3-inch gaps, the weight of the tracks, the endless rotation of steel against steel. He would remember that even perfection, under pressure, can be broken by something infinitely smaller. Germany's war machine was cracking. Its tanks still rolled, but the empire behind them was starving. The Allies had landed 156,000 men on D-Day. Within 1 month, that number would swell to over 1 million. The Reich could replace machines, but not momentum. The Tiger remained the symbol of German pride, a creature of precision and arrogance. But in the mud of Normandy, that pride was beginning to sink. Its beautiful flaw had already been seen by a young man, with a coil of wire in his hand and curiosity in his eyes. War was about to test which was stronger, the perfection of a machine or the ingenuity of a human being. The next time the tiger appeared, it wouldn't meet another tank. It would meet Mallister's wire. June 1944, Normandy. The fields looked peaceful, but death hid behind every hedge. The Americans called it bocage, a green labyrinth older than memory. It swallowed sound, muffled gunfire, and turned every step into a gamble. What had once been farmland now became a slow grinder of men and machines. The 1st Infantry Division had advanced only 2 miles in 18 days. Each gain was measured in blood and inches. German counterattacks hit like thunder. Behind those attacks came the Tigers, 4 of them this morning belonging to the 101st Heavy Panzer Battalion. Each one weighed 56 tons, armored like a fortress, armed with the 88mm cannon that could tear open a Sherman from a mile away. The Americans had nothing that could stop them head-on. Not a single weapon in Mallister's platoon could penetrate 4 inches of hardened steel. Their orders were simple: hold the road, delay the advance, die if necessary. Corporal James Mallister knew the math. The M1 bazooka could pierce 3 inches of armor at 100 meters, not enough. His men had rifles, grenades, courage, and not much else. 32 men, 2 launchers, no hope. But Mallister wasn't thinking about weapons. He was thinking about a machine, the one he had studied weeks earlier, outside the ruins of Marquet. He remembered the frozen mud caked between its overlapping wheels, the cracked rubber, the jammed sprocket. He had seen fragility hiding in perfection. He understood one truth about machines: when they move, momentum is their strength and their weakness. Stop that movement, and the machine destroys itself. That morning, the Tiger engines started their growl, a low, uneven thunder that crawled through the earth. The men froze. Dust drifted from the hedgerows. Birds vanished. Mallister looked down at the spool of wire in his hand. 300 feet of standard field telephone cable, braided steel, 1/8 of an inch thick, tension rated for 200 pounds. It wasn't made for war, but war never cared about intentions. He ran. Mallister sprinted down the sunken road, bent low, boots splashing through mud. The air smelled of diesel and rain. He found 2 fence posts, weathered oak, sunk deep into the earth, one on each side of the narrow lane. The perfect anchor. He looped the wire around the first post 3 times, tied it with a knot his father had taught him back in Pittsburgh, a knot that never slipped. He dragged the wire across the road, pulled it tight until it hummed like a string, 8 inches above the ground, invisible in the half-light. Then he tied it to the second post. His hands shook. The engines were louder now. 50 meters, 30. He dived back into his foxhole and waited. The first Tiger appeared through the mist, gray, immense, unstoppable. Its turret swung lazily left and right. The commander stood half out of the hatch, scanning for targets. The ground trembled as it rolled forward, dragging dust, snapping branches, flattening everything in its path. 20 meters, 10, 5. The Tiger hit the wire. Physics took over. The cable slipped between the wheels, twisted, wrapped itself around the spinning mass. 1 rotation, 2, 3. The tension rose faster than thought. 200 pounds multiplied by the torque of a 2,000-pound track assembly. The wire bit jammed, locked. The left side seized. The right side dragged forward. The tank lurched, twisted violently, and stopped dead. The driver revved harder, feeding the Maybach engine's 700 horsepower into a frozen system. Something snapped metal against metal. Total time, 2.8 seconds. The lead Tiger was blind, crippled, blocking the road. The others behind it had nowhere to go. The road was too narrow, the hedgerows too thick. The entire formation froze. Mallister exhaled for the first time in a minute. His hands were bleeding from the wire, his heart hammering like a drum. He had just stopped 56 tons of German steel with 8 ounces of cable. The silence didn't last. Radio chatter erupted from the trapped Tigers. American artillery began to pivot, Within minutes, shells would find their coordinates. But in that fleeting heartbeat before the smoke, before the noise, Mallister sat in the mud, staring at what he'd done, not out of pride, not disbelief, but understanding. Machines were predictable. Humans weren't. The monster had met its flaw. And in the next chapter of war, that flaw would become a legend. Jungbon, the tiger's growl became a scream. At 6:20, the lead tank of the 101st Heavy Panzer Battalion hit the invisible line, drawn by a man with nothing left to lose. The wire snapped tight, slipped between the overlapping wheels, and wrapped like a fuse burning backward. One rotation, two, three. The tension multiplied. The left track froze, and 56 tons of German engineering tried to fight the laws of motion. In 2.8 seconds, the most feared tank in Europe stopped cold. The driver felt the steering lever jerk out of his hands. He overcorrected, slammed the throttle. The Maybach HL 230 engine screamed with 700 horsepower of blind rage. Metal groaned. A torsion bar snapped like bone. The Tiger twisted 15 degrees off-center and locked in place, nose tilted, smoke curling from its exhaust. Behind it, 3 more Tigers froze. They couldn't move forward, the road was too narrow, couldn't retreat, the hedgerows too steep. 4 monsters trapped in a green tunnel of mud and stone. Inside the lead tank, the commander shouted into his radio, "Track blocked, mechanical failure." The second Tiger tried to ram it forward, tracks grinding and spinning, mud spraying into the morning air. It didn't matter. The road was a choke point carved by centuries, built for carts, not beasts of iron. That's when the Americans answered. At 6:26, Mallister's lieutenant called in coordinates. 3 batteries of 105mm howitzers adjusted fire from 4 miles back. The first shells hit 30 seconds later, airbursts set to detonate 20 feet above the hedgerows. The effect was apocalyptic. The sky cracked open. Thousands of red-hot steel fragments rained down in a storm of noise. German infantry caught in the open had nowhere to hide. The hedges that had protected them now turned into fire traps as white phosphorus lit the brush. Within minutes, the Tigers were alone, massive, blind, deaf, surrounded by burning fields and silence. Every war statistic begins with a single moment like this. By 1944, Allied artillery fired an average of 40,000 shells per day in Normandy. Over 425,000 German soldiers would be killed, wounded, or captured before August. And for every Tiger lost to enemy fire, 2 were lost to breakdown or fuel starvation. The war machine that once symbolized dominance was now cannibalizing itself. At 6:45, 4 American M4A1 Sherman tanks, new models with high-velocity 76mm guns, arrived at the edge of the road. The crews had studied reports. They knew exactly where to shoot. The Shermans maneuvered through soft ground. The Tigers couldn't cross, circling behind like wolves. The German gunners tried to rotate their turrets. Too slow. A Tiger needed 60 seconds for a full rotation. The Shermans fired in 15. The first armor-piercing round hit the rearmost Tiger. The 76mm shell punched through the 25mm engine deck, ruptured the fuel tank. A burst of flame, followed by black smoke, climbed into the sky. The second round struck the same spot. The Tiger exploded, ammunition cooking off, sending its turret spinning into the air. The remaining crews hesitated. The road was blocked. The air filled with shrapnel. Radios screamed. The math was hopeless. 4 immobilized Tigers against artillery, tanks, and infantry closing from both flanks. At 7, the German commander ordered surrender. White undershirts tied to radio antennas fluttered through the haze. The last Tigers of that column died without firing another shot. Mallister sat in his foxhole, hands shaking, the wire still trembling in the mud. He hadn't destroyed the Tigers, but he had stopped them, and that was enough. A single coil of wire had turned the most expensive weapon of the Reich into a barricade of its own defeat. By sunset, engineers counted the damage. The The lead Tiger's suspension arm was fractured, its mounting bracket bent, torsion bar broken. Estimated repair time 12 hours, if parts could even be found. They never were. That tank, number 211, was captured intact and later shipped to the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. A machine built to crush nations now sat silent in an American museum. The war rolled on. Paris would be liberated in 2 months. The Reich would burn for another year. But on that muddy French road, in those 2.8 seconds, something greater than steel had prevailed: human instinct, sharpened by fear and fed by necessity. And when the dust settled, Mallister's wire gleamed faintly in the morning sun, a thin silver line drawn between perfection and collapse. History had just changed course. The wire lay silent in the mud, glinting faintly under the morning sun, thin, fragile, unremarkable. But for the men who lived through that day, it had redrawn the geometry of war. By noon, the battlefield was quiet. Smoke clung low over the hedgerows, curling like ghosts above the wreckage. The disabled Tigers stood still, hulking monuments to the myth of invincibility. The numbers were merciless. Each Tiger had cost Germany 650,000 Reichsmarks and 300,000 man-hours to build. 4 of them, neutralized in one morning, meant a loss of more labor than it took to construct a small factory. For every Tiger captured, the Reich lost not just steel, but faith. When the engineers arrived to inspect the wreck, they couldn't believe what they saw. No mines, no explosives, no anti-tank fire. Just a single strand of standard field telephone wire, still jammed deep between the wheels, biting through rubber and into steel. They needed blowtorches to free it. The autopsy was methodical. 1 cracked torsion bar, 1 fractured suspension arm, 8 damaged road wheels. Repair time, 12 hours. The Tiger was drivable again by dusk, but by then, the battle had moved on. War doesn't wait for perfection. That Tiger, serial number 211, was eventually captured intact south of St. Lo in August 1944. 2 months later, it was shipped across the Atlantic to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where it still stands today, silent and enormous, a monument to both genius and blindness. Mallister never saw it again. He was recommended for the Bronze Star. The citation read, "For innovative action resulting in the neutralization of enemy armor." No mention of the wire, no poetry, just bureaucratic understatement hiding the pulse of something human and profound. When the war ended in 1945, Mallister went home to Pittsburgh. He finished his degree under the GI Bill, worked as an electrician for 3 decades, and raised 3 children. To his neighbors, he was just another quiet man who'd done his duty. He rarely spoke of Normandy. When asked, he would shrug and say, "I just didn't want to die that morning." That single sentence carried the weight of a philosophy, the idea that heroism isn't born from glory, but from necessity. Historians later traced at least 11 confirmed cases of German heavy tanks immobilized by similar wire traps during the summer of 1944. The results were mixed. Some failed, some worked, but the principle spread through the Allied engineering corps like wildfire. Field manuals were updated. Reports circulated with diagrams titled "Mechanical Entrapment of Panzerlauf." For a brief moment, a simple line of wire joined the arsenal of Western ingenuity, and the Germans noticed. By September, new directives warned panzer crews about cable traps in enclosed terrain. They were told to send infantry ahead, to fire machine guns along the hedgerows before moving. It was too late. The war was already turning. The numbers tell the story that words cannot. Between June and August 1944, the German army lost over 2,500 tanks in France, most not to enemy fire, but to abandonment, breakdown, or lack of fuel. Every Tiger lost was irreplaceable. The Allies, by contrast, produced 50,000 Sherman tanks during the war, cruder, weaker, but repairable, repeatable, unstoppable. Complexity collapsed under simplicity. Perfection was defeated by persistence. The tiger's legacy is a paradox. It dominated battlefields, but doomed its builders. It was an apex predator, trapped in an ecosystem that could no longer feed it. Germany's factories couldn't match the scale of America's industrial might. Their wonder weapons, the Tiger, the Panther, the Me-262, the V-2 were brilliant but brittle. They were machines born from desperation, built too perfectly for an imperfect world. Mallister's wire became the symbol of that truth. Every modern tank designer remembers it, whether they know his name or not. Today's M1 Abrams, Britain's Challenger, Germany's Leopard 2, all carry the same lesson in their bones. Fewer wheels, simplified suspension, modular parts. They trade elegance for endurance, efficiency for survivability. They're born from the ghosts of machines that failed because they forgot the first rule of war: reliability is victory. But beyond the engineering, there was something deeper in that thin strand of steel, a mirror of the human condition. The Tiger represented what happens when fear builds complexity to protect itself. Mallister's wire represented the opposite, courage distilled into simplicity. The war consumed 70 million lives, reduced cities to ash, and split the world into two ideologies. Yet in the middle of that chaos, a single man covered in mud, clutching a wire, reminded history that invention is not born in laboratories, but in desperation. When you stand today in the Infantry Museum at Fort Moore, Georgia, you can still see it. Behind a glass case, under a small brass plaque, lies the original wire, frayed, rusted, insignificant. Most visitors walk past without stopping. It doesn't look heroic, it looks ordinary. But it stopped the unstoppable. In black and white, that's how history remembers it. A machine built to dominate, undone by a mind that refused to surrender. A quiet man facing an impossible moment. A strand of wire stretched across the narrow road between arrogance and survival. Mallister's story doesn't end with medals or monuments. It ends with a truth that transcends the battlefield. Complex systems fail in simple ways, and the smallest act of ingenuity can alter the course of empires. He didn't fight for glory, he fought for a chance to live one more minute. And in that minute, measured in steel, tension, and courage, he rewired history itself. The Tiger taught the world that perfection breaks. Mallister taught it that imagination endures.